What of Ger Adams' statement that you heard there do you disagree with?
I disagree with what he has said in its entirety, Vincent. You know, even the weasel words, I think, at the end of it, where he said he wished me well, at that point I actually put my head in the hands, watching it from the public gallery, sitting, you know, no more than, you know, a couple of 100 feet away, I think. I think Ger Adams is an absolute disgrace. I can't say it strongly enough. It's disgraceful.
But why do you say that?
I say it because he's lying. And it's as simple as that. He's lying. He has lied through his teeth and changed his position on everything, Vincent.
About what in relation to this?
For example, he says that there was no IRA investigation into my abuse.
He didn't say that.
There was. Well, you know, he has said it in previous occasions
but
too.
He didn't say that.
He did, Vincent.
But go on. He said that the IRA investigation was morphed into a Sinn Féin cover-up.
No, he said the allegations around it then morphed into a cover-up.
All right, but go on, yeah.
You know,
yeah. What else do you disagree with him?
I mean, he says that I was advised to go to the RUC. I was not advised to go to the RUC. He forgets that there were other members of my family also who are live witnesses to this, who also met with the IRA, who were also ill-treated by the IRA. Those people have corroborated my account, Vincent. My father has had to put himself into the public domain to corroborate it. My mother, who is a primary school principal, you know, the same. My other relatives, this has dragged every single one of them, you know, into the public spotlight. And all of them who met with the IRA, including one who was involved in the investigation, can confirm that those IRA people investigated that abuse.
He said that Sinn Féin was not at fault and that he was not at fault. In what respect, in your opinion, was he at fault? I
think he's been at fault from the get-go. You know, he had an 19-year-old by the time I met him, traumatised young woman who knew him, who was sitting facing him. He did say what he said. I know there has been some discussion around that. I completely stand over it. I wish...
This is you said that he said, just to repeat that, would you mind?
He said, you know, he got up from one end of the room and came and sat on the side of me, and as I was staring past him out the window, he said that he talked about abuse and about his experience in relation to dealing with people who had been abused. And he said that sometimes abusers can be so manipulative that the people who are abused actually enjoy it. And I said to him, I didn't enjoy it. That is what he said. I stand over it, Vincent. He said it.
When you were on the programme before, you said that what he said was that that abusers are often terribly manipulative, and that sometimes the abused victims enjoy the abuse. And I just put it to you, and I put it to you again, that it's more likely that he said, when you had the word enjoy, you probably got very tense and angry, but that it would make more sense if he had said, often the abusers are very manipulative, and often they believe that the victims enjoy the abuse.
That is not what he said, Vincent, and I agree with you. It would make more sense if he had have said that. That isn't what he said. There is an easy way to verify this, and I wish the British government would do it. We had that particular meeting in his office at the time. There was an MI5 closed meeting in Westminster no more than a couple of years after that. Eliza Manningham-Butler, who at that point had responsibility for MI5, and this is all, it's a matter of public record, Mo Monaghan at the time confirmed that senior Sinn Féin officials were bugged throughout. I am telling you, Vincent, that if that recording exists, I would like the British government to release that recording. It would categorically prove my account.
All right. Did you have any sense in the Dáil yesterday that your abuse was being used as a political weapon against Sinn Féin? And I say this because, for instance, the government parties are responsible, Fine Gael and Labour and government, are responsible for cutting back hugely on funding of rape crisis centres. And as it happens, the rape crisis centre in Dundalk, for instance, had to close. And if they were serious and really concerned about the rape of women, wouldn't you think that they would be keen to keep funding organisations such as the Rape Crisis Centre?
Well, I mean, you're preaching to the converted, Vincent. I am a rape victim. The first thing that I would be saying, and I did say it in every closed meeting that I had with every single politician, north and south, was that resources needed to be directed into centres like the one in Louth and right across the board to train people who are trained to deal with victims and not re-traumatise them. And I, always am of that opinion. And I haven't shied away from that. But it isn't my responsibility.
Did it occur to you that some people in the Dáil were using your case as a political football, and they're not serious about concern for rape victims?
No, I think having met them all, north and south, every single person who has met me, away from the media spotlight, in the cases of people like Mike Nesbitt and Micheál Martin, for example, and the SDLP, have dealt very sensitively with me at times when I was very frustrated and feeling suffocated that I wasn't able to speak. And I take the point, Vincent. I actually think there is no getting away from the fact that this is a political issue. This essentially is about people who stood accused of abuse, who were moved around the jurisdiction. Nobody has any idea where those people are, what type of access they may have to other children. And I think that if a political party didn't raise that I would be hugely concerned.
Do you have evidence that the IRA did move sex abusers from the north to the south?
Yes.
Do you know the names of any of these people?
Yes, and I have already met with the Gardaí, and I am meeting them again next week.
Did you tell Enda Kenny about the names of these people?
I spoke to Enda Kenny about the issue in the round, and I did name some people whose names were in the public domain, and those names were passed on to the Gardaí.
How many people, how many abusers were exiled, as they say, from the north to the south by the IRA?
Well, that is the thing that Sinn Féin need to answer, Vincent. I understand that, and my possession at the minute, we're well into double figures on that, and I don't want to put a figure on it because names are still coming through. So if I give you a figure tonight, I can guarantee you it will be different by tomorrow. Now, I'm not saying that I don't know whether every single person is guilty of the allegations levelled against them. Had the IRA not involved themselves in those cases, those people probably would have been in a court of law. So and victims would have had the opportunity to seek justice for the wrongs that were done to them. But I think at this point, and this is why I'm continually putting myself out in the media, because I can't say it strongly enough, it is an urgent issue. We don't know where these people are. We know in some cases one ended up working in youth projects in both Belfast and Dundalk after his own brother believed that he was a child abuser and did absolutely nothing about it and put those children at risk. And I'm very angry about that. And I'm angry on behalf of Anya Adams also, who I have had contact with. We know of another person in Belfast who was a senior provisional who Gerry Adams knows or knew acutely well at one point in his life, who ended up working as a teacher, a substitute teacher, with children. Now, if you replicate that against other people who we don't know where they are, we don't know who they have access to, I think you're looking at a hugely serious issue here. And people need to look at their children and think, what would happen if something happened to them? And these people had knowledge of it and did absolutely nothing about it. And that's what frustrates me so much, Vincent, because in my own case, once that person was given money to go and he had access to a car and he disappeared, to use Gerry's term, which I think was hugely offensive yesterday, actually, given the fact of the history of the Republican movement in disappearing people. Once he was moved, I went to absolute pieces because I had no idea when I was going to bump into that person, whether any of my family were going to bump into him. I remembered how I felt when I was lying on a sofa and things were being done to me, and I heard the potential screams of other children at night time when I was trying to go to sleep. Now, I don't want to hear that for the rest of my life, Vincent, about other people who I know have been moved throughout this jurisdiction. And the most frustrating thing is, I know Sinn Féin know this information. I know they conducted an internal review and a damage limitation exercise on it. Those people need to go to the Gardaí. Gerry Adams stood up in the Dáil yesterday and said he went to the Guards with information. And we find out today on a radio programme he didn't actually meet the Gardaí face to face. He gave it to the Child Protection Officer in Sinn Féin. Now that tells me that he has learned absolutely nothing throughout the last number of weeks. Gerry needs to walk into a Gardaí station, meet a senior Garda and sit down from start to finish and tell absolutely everything he knows in relation to child sexual abuse and allegations that have been levelled against members of his own movement, against Sinn Féin members, against other people who were moved not just throughout Ireland. Some people were only moved a couple of miles away from the people they stood accused of abusing. In my case, that man was moved to London. His brother was put out by the IRA for having a similar allegation levied against him from another person. We know that Liam Adams was given succour by a priest in New York at one point and moved back. if the politicians weren't raising that, Vincent, and if the media weren't raising it, I would be absolutely devastated, because that would mean that nobody would have an interest in the protection of children.
In the letter that you wrote to the IRA Army Council, which you disclosed yourself, you seem to be of the view then that the IRA ought to be more vigilant in investigating cases such as this.
No, what I was saying to them was I couldn't accept that they had moved or facilitated my abuser out of the country and he would have access to other children.
More than that, you actually were critical of them for not investigating other cases. And given your own experience of an IRA investigation into abuse, it seems odd that you were in favour of them investigating.
Well, I wasn't in favour of them investigating other cases, Vincent. That may be your interpretation. It certainly wasn't mine. But also, that letter was written after the second investigation, and that second investigation wasn't included in the Spotlight programme for the specific reason that it would have shone a spotlight onto two other individuals who had also levelled abuse against that man. You know, at that point, the IRA were telling me that the RUC had facilitated this man out of the country. I didn't know who to believe. There was a second set of individuals brought in to deal with this in terms of the second investigation. The man had been put under house arrest in his sister's house and had been facilitated out. And at that point, I was so confused after being put through absolute madness for the guts of a year. Then to discover that there were two other young children in the mix also was hugely devastating.
The IRA Army Council said no revolutionary organisation can afford to have paedophiles or suspected paedophiles in its ranks, especially one with a profile in restorative justice, especially with a suspect who has a profile in restorative justice. It doesn't make good sense, good internal and external relationships, and it certainly doesn't bring Republicans further on its goals, aims and objectives. By letting the person who abused you go, you collectively planted the seed that it was okay for him to do what he did. It doesn't matter that I lost part of my childhood, and it was pointless in me going through the investigation. You also changed my opinion with regards to how the army, that's the IRA, deals with things. How can I advise anyone in a similar situation to myself to try and get right and wrong, to try and right the wrongs? I could have gone to the RUC and got the same result, etc. That seems to suggest that you were of the view that it was appropriate for the IRA to engage such investigations.
No. On the contrary, Vincent, actually what I was saying to them was you shouldn't have people like this in your organisation. You should be booting them out. Not that you should be investigating them, you should be booting them out. You know, the minute an allegation surfaced, that I could have gone to the RUC at that time was me saying to them, I could have gone to the RUC and got a better result. You know, it's in relation to the tone in which it was written. I wrote that as a 19-year-old, very traumatised person who was so frustrated, and that letter was written to the Army Council, not the people who had investigated the abuse. I was critical of them in the letter and said, you know, I have a serious problem with the people who made decisions in relation to this. You know, and this was during the second investigation, and this man had just gone, and I had already had one meeting with two representatives from one in particular from the Army Council, and that man now, I found out yesterday, stands accused of being involved in another case. You know, this is just complete madness.
This letter that you wrote, you were seeking an interview with the IRA, and you were complaining about the delay in the interview taking place. And I think some people will find it strange that, given what you said was your experience at the hands of IRA people in their interrogation of you, that you would want a further meeting with them.
Yeah, and the reason that I wanted the further meeting, Vincent, was because the first meeting that I had with these two individuals, it was Padraig Wilson and Mary Wright, the reason that I had that meeting was because the day before I had found out that this man had gone and nobody knew where he was, and I was freaking out. And I went to Siobhan O'Hanlon and I rang her, actually, I passed her on the road and then rang her and said, you need to get me somebody to speak to who can answer some questions. And she said, I can't get them today, they'll all be on the drink. So she got them for the next day, Vincent, and I went and I met them. And at that first initial meeting, my sole concern was, A, where is this man? B, how did he get away? And C,
how did he get away from the IRA?
He got a check. No, how did he get out of the?
No, you actually said you said it was unbelievable that somebody like this could escape from our down while the IRA was very strong.
He was under house arrest
By the IRA.
Yes,
so you were complaining that this person escaped from house arrest by the IRA.
Yeah, but at that point, Vincent, this was the second investigation. There were 3 victims. We had been warned that we couldn't tell anybody, we couldn't report it. A newspaper article broke the day before the first meeting, and I was given a guarantee by the IRA Army Council that they would find where this man was. And at that point, I was saying to them, this man needs to be reported. And there was a very acrimonious second meeting on the back of this.
The tone of this, you were asking the IRA to, you were complaining about the IRA having had a person under house arrest,
we also
letting them go.
Put under house arrest, by the way, Vincent.
You were also of the view that that it was proper for you conveyed the impression that it was proper for the IRA to undertake such investigations. For if they weren't to put somebody on house arrest or retain somebody on house arrest, they would have had to engage in some investigation anyway.
The context is everything, Vincent, and this is why I'm saying to you, there was a second investigation. I didn't know that man was placed under house arrest. One of my younger relatives, who was very young at the time, Siobhan O'Hanlon, came to collect me from a building to tell me that that young child had come out and said that someone had abused her, and I didn't know where this man was. And at that point I was taken to a house in Ballymurphy, and I wasn't told. My parents were sent for, they were in Donegal. Everybody gathered, and this is why I'm saying there are live witnesses to this. There was a full house whenever the IRA came and took me out of that house, Vincent, and at that point I didn't know where this man was. We were then subsequently told that he was under house arrest. My father had 2 separate meetings in which he asked for that man to be handed over into RUC custody, and that's the reason why that man was put out very, very quickly.
For him to be handed over to RUC custody?
Well, he was already gone by that stage, Vincent. I had been asking for a year to be able to report this.
There's also the issue to do with the letter you wrote to Breed Wright, who is the person that you described in the programme that you did with us previously as somebody who was terribly abusive of you and that you were terrified of her. You talked of how she summoned you to a house in Ballymurphy, I think, and that she put on a kettle and you thought that she was boiling water to pour it on you, and then you discovered that she was only making tea, and then you described the circumstance in which she behaved abusively in a bullying way towards you in the investigation. And yet you wrote a letter to her saying, you are never going to know how much you have helped me throughout all the shite that went on years ago and in the aftermath and again recently. I meant what I said about you being the only one from that time that I trusted, and for me to trust anyone after everything that had happened is a major thing, etc. You mean the world to me. You are kind, compassionate, committed, and above all, you gave me an ear when I needed it. That doesn't sound like the person you described previously. Yeah,
well, it does, Vincent, and I can explain it quite well. You know, for the first 6 months of that investigation, the IRA as an entity put me through absolute hell. There was a point during that first investigation, which was around about the 6-month mark, when an uncle of mine was taken in to that investigation as an IRA member in order to go and tell my parents. And I was put out into a bedroom, and I started crying. And that man came in to that bedroom and said to me, you know, Mairia, after the IRA had informed him, if this man hasn't done this, you need to tell me now. And if he did, he's a scumbag. And I cried. I was in absolute bits, actually. And Breed Wright came out of the living room and into the bedroom and stood up. She had a black leather jacket on. And it was the first indication. She said to me, do you know what, Mairia? Nobody would let this go on as long as it has if it wasn't true. And she hugged me. And it was the first indication from anybody, Vincent, that anybody had believed me during that first investigation. And I connected with Breed Wright on that night, after 6 months of repeated questioning into my sexual abuse. Now, there was a gap. Sorry, Vincent, you've asked me a question, and I'm quite happy to answer it, and I will answer it. There was then a gap. And then there was a second investigation that we didn't ask for as a family. We didn't want. There were 2 other traumatised young victims. That started in July. In August, that man had disappeared out of the country. It was complete turmoil, madness. Everybody, all of my family members were traumatised, and we are a large family. It was extremely difficult to deal with, and I was suicidal. And that woman then, at that point, along with Siobhan O'Hanlon, spent a bit of time with me after it. And then in years later, something else happened in my life in 2003, and that woman made contact again. And I have no problem in saying that she was compassionate, that she did listen to me, that I did keep contact with her, I had a psychotherapist at the time who likened it to Stockholm Syndrome, and people may find that strange, but I'm going to give you an example, Vincent, of just how strange things can be. Breach Wright's brother was one of the disappeared. The IRA took him away and murdered him and buried him, and he still hasn't been found. And that was a very traumatic thing for Breach Wright's family. Breach Wright then went on to join the IRA, as did her sister Mary, who rose through the ranks in the IRA and spent half of her life in jail. You know, not only that, but Breach Wright wrote a letter herself, which was published in a Fiblock newspaper, where she thanked the IRA and she thanked Gerry Adams, the man who stood accused of being involved in the disappearance of some of those people. She thanked them for their efforts to find the bodies. For me, that is a very similar situation to what I was in with that woman at the time. You know, and it is a strange world to be growing up in. I've grown up in it all my life. I stand over those letters, Vincent. You know, the first investigation, I was put through hell. It is still living with me to this day. I did keep contact with her.
No doubt
you can see from the Army Council letter that I was completely up in the air, was very distrustful, actually, of the IRA, and my main concern in that letter was for the protection of children, and I think that's quite clear. And I had a serious, serious problem with the people who made the decisions and let that man go. And had they not involved themselves, and had they not forced themselves into the investigation of my sexual abuse, which, by the way, I did not ask for, that man would have been in court a hell of a lot sooner. Now, see, when he was brought to court in 2010, Vincent, all of those people who were involved had an opportunity to give evidence to bring that man to justice, and not one of them did.
Mairia, I just have to put it to you that your depiction of that woman the last time you were on this programme was
I was petrified of her for the first 6 months, Vincent. I absolutely was.
Finish my question. That your depiction of that woman, of Breach Wright, was of a woman who was callous, who was cold, who was menacing, who was bullying, who was terrifying. And yet you write this letter, whatever happened subsequently, you think that she was the opposite, a hugely compassionate, caring, loving woman. And was it fair to describe her in those terms that you previously described her, given what you knew of what you subsequently came to realise was her real nature?
Absolutely, yes, Vincent, because she was callous. She was there as an IRA representative, and the IRA as an entity were investigating my sexual abuse. But I've never hidden the fact. For example, Spotlight actually made reference to the fact that I told them that Breach Wright was compassionate. I detailed my contact with her afterwards. The police, in my police file, you know, it's in the evidence for the court. I then subsequently wrote an online blog where I specifically referred to the fact that I wrote letters to Breach Wright and the reason that I did so. And let me tell you, Vincent, see that letter in particular that you referred to? It was written in 2005, a week after Breach Wright had taken me to a psychiatric unit and signed me in. And on the night that Breach Wright took me to the psychiatric unit, she broke down and she apologised to me for her role in that IRA investigation. And she told me that she felt guilty and that the IRA had re-traumatised me. I actually think that's a fairly natural reaction to write someone a letter afterwards, because I connected with her at that point again. You know, and I make no apologies for doing it. I stand over everything I said. My account was completely open to the Spotlight team, as it has been to the police whenever they were putting the evidence before the court. I have no problem in saying that at points in my life Breach Wright was compassionate. For the first 6 months, Vincent, when the IRA took me repeatedly and questioned me about my sexual abuse, that woman was terrifying, because she was there on behalf of an organisation who were telling me, we are investigating this, we've heard it's in the public domain, you have to speak to us, you're not allowed to speak to anyone else. I wasn't even allowed to tell my own parents, Vincent. And can you picture, as a parent, the IRA coming to your house and suddenly telling you that their daughter has been abused by someone who has been married into the family, and then that they can't even tell it. My father couldn't even tell his own mother, Vincent, for a number of months, and she couldn't be told until that man was already under house arrest by the IRA. And again, we didn't ask for it. I didn't ask for people to intrude into my life.
I just want to move on to another issue, and it concerns Siobhan O'Hanlon. And the reason I'm interested in your dealings with Siobhan O'Hanlon is that she was a close associate. I think she was his personal secretary, and she was one of the first people you told about the abuse, even while the abuse was continuing. And then you told her about the RA interrogations, etc., subsequently. And I've raised the issue, is it plausible that she, given her close working relationship with Gerry Adams, that she never told him at the time? Do you believe she did?
I know she did.
How do you know?
Well, there was a newspaper article printed in August, I think, August 2000. And there was panic on behalf of the IRA because they had got wind of it, because a women's centre had been phoned by the Sunday World at the time, who wrote the article, and the Sinn Féin press office was phoned, and they immediately clamped down to try and stop that story going out. And it went out. And I got a phone call in the early hours.
What was the story?
It was a story in relation to an IRA investigation into a high-profile Republican in the West Belfast area who stood accused of abusing children in the Upper Springfield area. Now, Siobhan O'Hanlon, I got a phone call in the early hours of the morning to go to an uncle's house of mine because the paper prints early up there. He had the newspaper. I was absolutely devastated at the fact that this story was breaking, because even though I wasn't referenced in the article, the other two people were. Siobhan O'Hanlon came to that house, and she told me that she had gone that day to my Uncle Joe to inform him, and that Adams was aware of it. And I met with Jerry Adams shortly after that newspaper article, within a couple of days of that newspaper article being printed.
But just specifically, do you have any recollection of Siobhan O'Hanlon telling you during the period of your abuse and during the period of the interrogation that she had told Jerry Adams about what was going on?
No, but I think the world and his wife would know that the minute Siobhan O'Hanlon thought that the IRA or Sinn Féin would be under threat, that the first person she would be going to would be Jerry Adams, because she saw throughout her life, and I love Siobhan, and I still love Siobhan. I think she did things wrongly at times. I think, in particular, Jerry gave a eulogy at Siobhan's funeral where he painted a picture of her, which I actually think was quite accurate in some ways, where he mentioned how good she could be at times, but when she reared up on you, you knew you were reared up on. That it was Siobhan. I was very close to her at one point in my life, and at other times we were estranged because of the way in which the IRA dealt with this matter. But there's no way in this world, if Siobhan O'Hanlon thought that Jerry or Sinn Féin were under threat, being his personal assistant, being there every day around him, that she wouldn't have briefed him or told him about it. And it was clear when I met with Jerry Adams that he had known about it. Okay. We spoke about it.
Finally, what do you hope happens now?
Well, I hope, Vincent, that people remember that in all of this I'm a victim, and that's the first thing, and that it is hugely traumatic for me.
I don't think anybody doubts that.
And every time, Vincent, and I have to deal with this, I have put myself up repeatedly. Every time a question is answered, I have taken it. It feels like a punch in the gut. I'm not a politician. I have consistently given my account of what happened to me. The reason that I did that was because I feel haunted by the fact that those people may have access to other children. The people who can put a stop to this, Vincent, are the people who won't come on your programme and answer the questions. Jerry Adams will not come on your programme because he knows he will be placed under scrutiny to answer them. I'm quite happy to answer anything that is put to me, but it re-traumatises me every time that I do so. And Jerry Adams has it within his gift to stop it now, and that's what he needs to do.
Yeah, I said last night when I saw a tweet of yours, I said that Jerry Adams, I didn't think Jerry Adams had been invited on our programme last night. He had been, and he's been invited on our programme several times. He's invited today to come on the programme, and there's a standing invitation to him to come on the programme and deal with all these issues.
So what does that tell you?
Well, that he doesn't like coming on the programme.
No, but that he doesn't want to be placed under scrutiny.
Well, there's a lot of other people, I was almost saying your friend or my friend, and hasn't come on the programme ever.
And Kenny doesn't stand accused of covering up the IRA.
No, but I'm just making the point about people who don't come on the programme, that Jerry Adams is not the only one, and I think the reason he doesn't come on, it relates to another but kindred issue. Maria, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
We did that interview earlier this evening, and just looking at the tweet machine, and it is very critical of the questions I put to her in the main, and saying that I was treating her as a politician, that I was asking questions that were inappropriate. There are other tweets that said that it was appropriate. Just to explain, I thought that it was fair to put to her questions that Jerry Adams raised in the Dáil concerning the letter she wrote to Breed Wright, and about issues that raised by other people concerning the letter she wrote to the Army Council, and I felt it was fair to put those issues to her, and I personally thought she dealt with them very effectively.